If you've watched TV in the last 25 years and you loved what you were seeing, there's a good chance it was written or produced by today's guest on the Elmore Leonard podcast, Graham Yost. Some of the great shows he's been involved in over the years include Band of Brothers, Boomtown, John Adams, The Pacific, Falling Skies, Sneaky Pete, Masters of the Air, and The Americans. He is currently producing two of the best yet very different shows on television, Slow Horses and Silo, available on Apple TV. You might also be familiar with some of his work in film, including the low-budget independent masterpiece Speed, which starred Keanu Reeves, Sandra Bullock, and Dennis Hopper. But since this is the Elmore Leonard podcast, there's a good chance you're familiar with Justified. It was based on Elmore's short story Fire in the Hole, ran for 7 seasons on FX, and is rightly considered one of the very best adaptations of Elmore's work. Graham, thank you so much for joining us on the Elmore Leonard podcast. It is a thrill to have you here today.
Well, thanks, Judd. Always happy to talk about Elmore Leonard and his writing and him as a human being.
I like to start the podcast off when we're talking to people who've worked with him, who knew him, with the same question, which is, what was the book that got you sucked in? Maybe not the first Elmore book you ever read, but the one that made you say to yourself, this guy's really good. I want to read more of what he's got.
It was one and the same. It was the first book of his that I read, and it was La Brava.
Oh, wow.
And I had been hearing about Elmore for some time. You know, this was the 80s at some point. I haven't pinpointed it, but it was hardcover. So I sprung for that. But it was, this thing was building about him and how great he was. And I thought, well, I'll give this a shot. And I think I was on vacation. And that started it. And I went forward and bought every book as they came out, pretty much, and then also went back into the catalog and read. I think I was going back was to read Bandits and Glitz and things like that, but just kept on moving forward.
So yeah, I mean, La Brava is certainly one of my favorite books, and we've been talking to some Florida-based writers, and as well as some of Elmore's family, about what Florida meant to him when he moved there. And have you had a chance to read Cooler Than Cool, the biography that came out a few months ago about Elmore?
I have not.
It's pretty great, and highly recommended. And there's a great little seed the biographer plants about Elmore bought his mom a motel in Pompano Beach, Florida, in I think the late 70s, for her to kind of retire to and run and manage.
I mean, that to me is just an Elmore story, in that you don't just buy your mom a house. You buy her a motel that she's going to have to run. So it's just like all the stories that would come from that. It's just...
Yeah, it was his mom and I believe her sister, and from what Elmore's son Bill told us, they didn't always get along, but they worked together and took care of the place. And yeah, they had all kinds of fun people coming in and
it
out
just
of
keeps
it.
getting better and better. The fact that they didn't get along but managed to work. I mean, it's just... Yeah.
We haven't covered Cat Chaser, which is the main character works at a motel, but when we do, a lot of the stories will definitely come up. How did you first come across Fire in the Hole, which became the basis for Justified?
So it really started with the two heads of Sony Pictures Television reaching out to me when I was actually in Australia working on The Pacific, a World War II miniseries. And they said, we've got this pilot that we'd like to redo. Great title, Dead Lawyers. And I took a run at that with my buddy Fred Golan, who I've worked with since Boomtown, and he came, he was there for the whole ride of Justified and on, and he's on Silo too. But at any rate, we tried our hand at that. It didn't work out, but I owed Sony one more script, and I had an idea, and it didn't pan out, and so they just said, well, we've optioned this novella by Elmore Leonard, and it was like, okay, I'm interested because I love Elmore Leonard.
Yeah.
And Sarah Timmerman and Carl Beverly were producing. Michael Dinner was going to direct and take a look at it. And so I read Fire in the Hole, and I said yes immediately. And the two reasons were, it's Elmore, but it's not in Florida or Detroit. It's somewhere else. No one has a show set in Kentucky, so I thought that would be interesting. And I thought Raylan Givens could be the coolest character on television. And it really came down to the one scene. He's over at Ava's Dewey Crow shows up, and Raylan sends him out, and Dewey says, yeah, I'm going to go out to my car and I'm coming back in. And Raylan comes out and says, can you rack a load in that shotgun before I put a hole in you? And I said, that's it. All cop shows, cop characters would be yelling, get down, drop the gun, all this stuff, and they'd have the gun. And then Raylan just has his hand over his gun, and he's just ready. And it's like, that's the coolest character in television. And that's how it started. So I said yes, and then we went out and pitched it, and pitched it to 8 places. 6 were interested, and it really came down to FX or HBO. And we went with FX in part because John Landgraf had worked on the Karen Sisco show. He'd been at Danny DeVito's company.
Jersey.
Yeah, Jersey. And when they developed that, and in fact, John co-wrote one of the scripts, I think. So he had a love for Elmore Leonard. And later on, I find out, I think they tried another version of Raylan with another writer. And but he was just very interested in, he really, it was one of his goals to do a great Elmore Leonard show before he had to hang up his spurs. Thank God he's still going, because Landgraf's amazing. But, so we just felt that we would have the right audience, that would be the right place to go. When we pitched it, all the questions he asked were such that I said, in the pitch, I said, John, if I knew that you were going to ask these questions, we would have come here first, so I could have used all this shit in the other pitches. Because it was really smart, and I wasn't just flattering. I mean, it was just, that was true.
Do you remember what kinds of questions he was asking?
Not in the least. Not in the least. It was just smart stuff that was very Elmore specific.
Right.
One thing that they did, we knew that it being FX, they were going to want something. Elmore's characters usually don't change very much. And over in television, we knew for the run of the show, we would need Raylan to evolve a little bit. It was interesting. Tim Olyphant and I agreed he should progress, a scooch, like a centimeter. He asked, we have to raise a question in the beginning and answer it at the end. And it doesn't have to be the biggest thing in the world, but it is something. And but we knew, my joke with John was, I said, well, you guys are FX, they were doing Nip Tuck and The Shield and stuff. I said, you won't be happy until at the end of the pilot episode, Raylan goes home and in his basement he's got a 19-year-old boy chained to a wall. And they laughed and everything. We ended up using that for the Quarles character in season 3.
That was the Neil McDonough character?
Yeah, Neil McDonough.
That was great. I'm curious because I remember Fire in the Hole was one of a bunch of. My copy of the book is called When the Women Come Out to Dance.
Yes.
Were there other Elmore stories that were kind of under option at the time, or it was just Fire in the Hole?
I'm honestly not sure. So backing up a little bit, the reason the story got to me and that it was at Sony and option was because Carl Beverly, Sarah Timmerman's partner, had been flipping through and is an Elmore fan and read that story and said, what about this? Yeah. And Sony said, that's interesting. Michael Dinner said, I like that. And so, because Dinner had directed some, at least one Karen Sisco, and I think I'm blanking a little bit. I think I think they were involved with Sisco in some way. So there was this Elmore Leonard interest, and that one just struck everyone. I mean, there's a reason why Raylan had appeared in Pronto and Riding the Rap and this story, that he was a character. And let's be honest, I mean, there's a reason why when we did the bonus season of Justified, it was City Primeval, and that Ray is a proto-Raylan in many ways.
Sure.
And it was sort of his first run at a character like that. So it was, because he didn't do a lot of law enforcement people. Sisco, yes.
It sounds like it was down to FX and HBO, and at that point, you just mentioned you were working on The Pacific, which was HBO. You did Band of Brothers, HBO, From Earth to the Moon, HBO. Like, what was it? I mean, you mentioned John Landgraf was such a huge fan, but was there something else about FX that was another one of the shows that you worked on, which is I didn't watch until COVID because I'm a loser, but it's
as good as any show I've ever seen, The Americans, also on FX. Is there something about being on FX in particular where it's not quite HBO in terms of the freedom you have. It's not a network. But it's sort of in between.
It's one of those questions, and it's sort of like, how do all these different platforms have their own identity? And now I'm using the term platform. So when we started this thing, it was just networks and studios, and
Yeah.
there was the hint of streaming to come. But I think listen, a lot of it comes down to Landgraf, but also the team he picked. So Nick Grad and Jonathan. It's just a great team of people. It was a mathematical thing, which is they had a lower, I don't know if I'm going to get this right, but the ratio of scripts developed to scripts produced was better at FX. That HBO was known that things could languish in development for a long time. Or not languish, but it's just the reality. They would commission a lot of stuff. They had a lot of money, and they would just wait to see what they really needed. So FX was a little more, if they like it, they're going to go. So that was exciting, and from the jump, it was Landgraf and just him talking about casting and stuff, and it was clear that they were very interested in building a show that could not just get made as a pilot, but also could become a working series.
So in terms of casting, I first really got to know Tim Olyphant as an actor from Deadwood, which I think is one of the great shows. Were they already looking for something for him, or how did that process go? And then I'm curious, I've heard you talk before, other interviews about casting and Cami Patton, and you guys seem to have a really long, fruitful relationship. And I just love to get your thoughts on, working with her, casting in general, about how you approach it, because you seem to be pretty good at it.
Well, casting Tim and casting the part of Raylan is in some ways is sort of out of the hands of me and Cami. It becomes this. It's more Landgraf. It's more who's going to satisfy the network. We kicked around some other names. We kicked around Woody Harrelson. He was just too expensive. There was a couple other ideas, but we met a couple people. We did a couple auditions. I actually did the Dewey Crow scene, and I thought Cami had taped it and was going to use it against me for the rest of my life. It was just like before, like a couple people had come in and I said, "This is how the scene should be done," and I got it because I'm a ham bone, and it was as a joke. But she didn't record it, thank God.
She sent us a copy.
What? She sent you a copy?
No.
But it was Tim was at the top of the list because of Deadwood, but also because of what's the thing he did with Steve Zahn, The Getaway or something? Not The Getaway. It's this thing set in Hawaii, and it's who's the bad guy, who's the good guy, and it's race and chase in the jungle and stuff. But he'd also done, what was it, Catch and Release with Jennifer Garner. And so we knew he could be romantic, we knew he could be funny, and we knew he could be scary, and we knew he could be, he could wear a hat.
Right.
He'd look good in a hat. And so he was right, but he wasn't available. He was still doing a film called The Crazies, and wasn't going to be available until the end of May. And it was just Landgraf saying, okay, then we'll make it a mid-season show. We'll push the release. It's worth it to get him because he's the right guy. And then the big thing was Boyd. But everyone else was Cami. Cami finding Joelle Carter, Cami, presenting people to us. Damon Harriman, for God's sakes, Dewey Crow, who was the gift that just kept on giving through all the seasons.
He's Australian, isn't he?
He's Australian. Cami and I had both worked with Jacob Pitts on The Pacific. I wanted to put him in something. He's just so good. Erica Tazel was just someone that came up in casting, and Cami has a great eye. And Nick Searcy, that guy had been bugging me since Earth to the Moon. When are you going to put me in a show? When are you going to put me in a show? And Nick, I'm going to put you in a show now. You shut the hell up. But Tim, we waited for Tim, and it was just clear from the first day. I think the first day we were filming at what was one of our many sets that became Ava's house. So that was Ava's house as a house we had in Western Pennsylvania, and then we found stuff in LA, and then we ended up landing on stuff at the Disney Ranch. But it was just clear, first of all, that he was perfect, Joelle was perfect, and Damon Harriman was just hilarious. And so there was that sense right from the early days of filming the pilot that I think this has got a shot.
Everyone just felt, and I know Elmore from the beginning, I think from even when he read the first draft, was just like, this is it.
Did anyone share what my conversation with him was like? So I think it was like my first conversation with Elmore Leonard, who I've revered. And by the way, I never called him Dutch because he never said, call me Dutch. And I have a feeling that was like a name, like I have a family nickname that I'm not going to share with you. But my brother can call me that. Our parents are gone. I have one friend from high school who can do it sort of as a joke, and that's fine. If anyone else does it, it just doesn't feel right. And
Oh
so
man.
so he was always Elmore to me, but we got on the phone and he'd read the pilot and he said, I think this is great. And I said, Elmore, of course you think it's great because most of the dialogue is yours. And I mean, that was my standard line, which was I'd be looking at my screen going, what's Raylan going to say next? And it's like, well, what did Elmore have him say next? Let's try that. Let's try, okay, he's got, an exchange of 30 lines in this scene. I need down to 15. I can do that and just use the stuff. I mean, Ava's dialogue when she's talking about Lysol, it's like the finest cleaner she can get, and she calls it an RC cola, and all this stuff is right out of the novella, and
Yeah.
there's a good reason why Elmore liked it, but that was also our guiding principle, which is if you're going to do an Elmore Leonard show, do an Elmore Leonard show. Don't make it anything other but that. So.
But I mean, I guess two things. One, you certainly did more than one episode,
Yeah,
and
no,
so
because every episode after that, we had to make that shit up. So, I mean, it
yeah.
was, yeah.
Was there you'd mentioned, and I wasn't sure if it was because you weren't as wild about the books or the stories, but Raylan first showed up in Pronto, and there's Pronto and Writing the Rap, which Writing the Rap he's really the main character. In Pronto he kind of takes over halfway through. But I notice in the credits it always says based on Fire in the Hole by Elmore Leonard. Pronto and Writing the Rap, were they just not available because there was a Pronto movie made previously, or was that ever something you guys wanted to do, or you just decided no, this is we're in Kentucky and we're good?
Yeah, it wasn't so much just doing a Raylan show; it was also doing a Harlan show, and
Yeah.
and Kentucky in general, including Lexington, obviously. But there's also a certain amount of legal chicanery involved, which is the opening scene in the series is loosely based on the scene in Pronto,
The end of Pronto.
the end of Pronto.
Yeah.
But we couldn't get the rights to use that scene, so we couldn't have it. We just said, well, it's not going to be set indoors. There's not going to be the whole thing with the bags on the ground. There's not. Let's just have it between Raylan and the guy. I mean, I think in my first drafts there were more people, and it was just, it's getting into dodgy territory. And it was also Elmore described that scene in the opening of Fire in the Hole. I mean, he described having this thing with Tommy Bucks. So that became our version of that.
Yeah.
Man, if we'd ever, Michael Dinner was always pushing for us to do our own version of Pronto because he just wanted to go to Italy, and not just be shooting up in Santa Clarita and around L.A. As for Writing the Rap, there is an episode in season 1 where we used big chunks of Writing the Rap, and we got a special dispensation from Elmore to use story elements from that. We were just jammed up. The first
Yeah.
season was the most difficult season to do because we were still finding out what the show was and how to make it work and how to write like Elmore.
It's funny you talked about the hat, and Tim Olyphant has to look good in a hat. In the movie version of Pronto, James LeGros, who I think it's great that he is part of Justified, but he was the first actor to play.
I know, and what a mensch to just, okay, I'll come into this show and I'm not playing Raylan and I'll just be this goofy bartender character who doesn't last forever. We loved him. He was such a great guy to have on board. But anyway, does this come back to the hat?
It does, because
The hat.
he is dressed as Elmore describes him, and it's not as cool of an outfit. I mean, it's a faithful The costume designer did a great job. It's like, well, this is what Elmore wrote. He's wearing a suit and a businessman's cowboy hat,
Businessman Stetson. Oh yeah. No, no,
but it didn't help.
it's not. No,
Yeah,
that's Elmore the writer, and God bless him. And there was never a tussle. And Elmore, he spent years in the salt mines of Hollywood, and so he'd written scripts, and he would say he stopped doing that because he didn't like getting notes. So he didn't really give us any notes. The closest he gave us a note was, "Are you sure about the hat?" Because he loved the businessman Stetson because it's a very particular thing.
yeah.
I was watching Eight and a Half recently, filling in my very spotty classic film knowledge, and I went, "Oh my God, that's a great hat! I mean, that is a fantastic hat." But the businessman Stetson, meh. We found a better Stetson for.
Yeah, I think you chose the right hat.
And then, by the way, for the rest of the show, there was someone who had the hat, and that was their job. They had the special box, the hat. There was the backup hats. There was a stunt hat. There were all these hats. The hat had its own trailer, had its own manager. No, it wasn't like that. But it
What
was.
was the hat budget? That is,
It wasn't. It wasn't that expensive, but it was just like you got to treat the hat well.
so Justified is obviously one of the favorite shows of everybody here, the Elmore Leonard podcast, but also Soul Horses. I've read Wool, and I haven't watched just because I want to watch it all at once. So forgive me. But are there qualities that Elmore and Mick Herron and Hugh Howey have in common from your standpoint?
I mean, I think it's as vague as they create worlds that I feel are inhabitable, that you can go in and live in that world and make it hopefully real. It's a harder hill to climb with Silo, because it's just bananas, people living in this underground silo. But we try to land it as much as possible by making these characters as human as possible, and that's been the fun of that show. That is not a funny show. It is just not a funny show. There's little bits of humor. There's a reason why Cami and I insisted on getting Rick Gomez in, and Rick Gomez, he played the U.S. deputy U.S. attorney in Justified, who would show up, and it was a bit of a thorn in Raylan's side. He was also recurring in Boomtown, but most notably, he was a big character in Band of Brothers. So Cammy worked on Band of Brothers. I worked on Band of Brothers. We cast those people as much as we can. That was the casting job of a generation. Use those guys. They're going to be good, but they're also funny. And Slow Horses is very funny, and that's Mick Herron. And it's also Will Smith, British Will Smith, who's the showrunner on that show, at least through the first 5 seasons. Will and I have left the show after season 5. One thing that they have in common is the humor. Elmore is very, very funny, but like Elmore always insisted, never have characters laugh. Never have them laugh at each other's jokes. If they're funny, what happens is there's a look between two characters, and it's like, okay, we're on the same wavelength. We both see the world kind of in the same way. It's a little off kilter. It's a little askew. We see both the humor and the tragedy and everything, and without saying anything. It's just an attitude. And are they in sync? And Cisco and Foley in the trunk in and Out of Sight, within a minute, thanks to Elmore and thanks to Scott Frank, that these people are on the same wavelength. And so there is a similarity for Mick Herron and Elmore Leonard. Mick loved Justified and loved to give me shit about it, because like he signed one of his books to me and he wrote, "We dug coal together." It's like, fuck you, man. But I love that. I love that he gave me shit. You don't see the characters in Slow Horses laughing at the shit they say. No one laughs at what Lamb says. We're laughing, but for the people who have to work for him, it's just there's a hellscape.
Yeah,
Which
it
makes it
is.
even funnier. And one of the things, we brought up Damon Harriman playing Dewey Crow. We would write him stuff that we thought was hilarious, and he would come in, and the same thing for Patton Oswalt is Constable Bob. would come in and just play it dead straight, absolutely straight, which made it even funnier. And
Right.
so God, writing for people like that and writing in that world was just, that was the hardest thing at the end of the show was, man, now we don't have an excuse to try and write like Elmore Leonard. We go any further with this, it's an affectation. But we had that time of 6 seasons where we got to try and do that.
If you're allowed to say, or if you're not allowed to say, cough twice, but could there be another bonus season of Justified?
I hope so. I hope so. The interested parties are ready and willing. That last bonus season cost more than anyone wanted to spend, and that was problematic. And so the business has changed so much since that season was done. We filmed that in 22 to now. Just the contraction. So
Yeah.
it might just be purely a financial thing that it just can't happen. But Dave Andron and Michael Dinner ran that show. I think Dave would probably take it from here, but he's got ideas, and they're good, smart ideas. And look, it was no accident that we saw Boyd in
Yeah.
the last run of City Primeval.
Yeah.
That was always a hope. But if that's all we see, that final scene between Raylan and Winona, and then Raylan and his daughter, man, that just sort of,
Yeah.
I was really happy with what they did.
Yeah.
And I
No,
got
it
to
was.
be in the writer's room occasionally and with Walter Mosley. So, that was a gift. So,
There you go. He is I think one of the all time greats, and we're trying to get him on to join us because there's not that many people who've done what Elmore's done in terms of books, and I mean I think Walter's up at like almost 40 novels, and I mean it is plus all the television work he does. It's
and
kind
he
of
was
wild.
a huge fan of Justified. I mean, that's
Yeah.
what, Andron met him working on Snowfall, and then it
Oh
came out.
wow.
It's like, no, he's a huge fan of Justified. And, when you hear that, there's, listen, that's some of the, I always maintain the best reviews we got were that the people of Harlan, Kentucky got a kick out of it. The U.S. Marshal Service, actual people, not the service, but they got a kick out of it. But most importantly, Elmore liked it.
Yeah.
That was a thing. But then when you hear, Jack Nicholson was depressed for a few weeks when the show ended. It's like I'm sorry he was sad, but I'm so glad that we entertained him. Uh,
Yeah.
so
Well, look,
and
if
Stephen Sondheim was a huge fan of the show, which I heard through Margot Martindale, and it was relayed to her by Meryl Streep, of all things. So, those are about the only things that I will crow about, is the fact that these people who I admire so much got a kick out of the show.
That's so great. That is so great. I'm wondering, Justify was typically 12 episodes a season, and then
I think we were no, we were 12. I think we were 13. I'm not sure. Anyway,
I'm gonna defer to you. But
it's all a blur now. We do 10 for Silo, and it crushes us. But
yeah, but Slow Horses, which is I think 6. I don't like it as a fan because I want to hang out with these people for more than you know 6 hours a year. I mean, just from a writing standpoint, do you prefer that, or is it just based on budget, or
the thing with Slow Horses is I came into that. I Googled. I just finished reading Le Carre's Legacy of Spies, his final Smiley book, and I wanted more. And I just Googled well-written spy fiction, and up came Slow Horses. And so I read the first one, and then I read the next 3 in the next 2 weeks. Inquired, long story, but it ended up with finding out that Apple was doing it. My deal was still at Sony. I asked if I could have some time off, but I first asked Apple because I knew a lot of those people because they had been running Sony when we were doing Justified. I said, could I be of service? And they said yes. And so I went to England for 3 weeks and ran a little writer's room with Will Smith and Jamie Lawrenson, who's the producer of the show, and Morwenna Banks, who's doing another Mick Herron show down Cemetery Road with, oh my God, Thompson, Emma Thompson. Really, Morwenna, you're working with Emma Thompson? I hell with you.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
so we did that for just 3 weeks just to break the first book. And the thing that I came in with, because they were at that point, we're trying to combine the first two books to get more episodes because of whining people like you, Judd. That want more episodes. And I said, no, you've got to just do one book at a time. Each book is great. Just do one book at a time and 6 episodes. And then it was once they got Gary, and it was his producer, Doug Urbanski, said, well, why don't you do 2 books in a production cycle? So
Yeah.
basically, they've done that. So the first season of the first year of Slow Horses, they filmed Slow Horses and Dead Lions.
Right.
Then take a break, get the next, and do it that way so that it's not, I mean, for us, it's a year and a half between seasons on Silo.
Yeah.
On, other shows, it's 2 years, and which is really strains the love of the audience. But the idea with the Slow Horses is that they come out a year or faster.
Hmm.
And you could push on that. You could get them down to 10 months. I don't think that, I think that if, as long as you're giving the audience stuff on a fairly regular basis, I think the 6 is okay. But his stories do not play out over more than 6 episodes. They just don't.
And that's also another Gary Oldman and Kristen Scott Thomas and Jonathan Pryce for a while at least. And I
And
mean,
Jack Loudon,
for
and
sure.
I've only been on the set, really on the set once, and it was a night shoot for something in season 5, which is coming up. It was Gary and Jack and this other actor who's a newer character, Co. Oh my God, it was just one of those great, great scenes, and one of the biggest lines, one of the big it laughs in the scene. I won't give it away, but Will Smith would be the first. That was Gary. Gary came up with that.
Yeah.
And so it's a great team effort of people really understanding the characters, and Will being he was a comedian, and he just knows, and he worked on Veep for several seasons. He was in the thick of it and wrote for the thick of it.
Uh-huh.
um, and so he knows what it's like to be on the set and go, that line's good, but maybe this would be better. Let's try this.
Hmm.
And but that just means it's hard, to do that and be also, turning out the scripts.
For sure. I think, I mean, one of the things that is really unique to both Justified and Slow Horses is I think it's just the right tone in terms of there can be lightness, there can be humor, but you never, like in either show, you never lose that edge. You never lose that sense of jeopardy. And I think that's a really, really hard thing to do over an extended period of time. I think, not to say that it's easy to do it in a movie, but over an extended period of time when you have a 10-hour story a year, it's very impressive. I'm just curious. I know I'd read that your dad had a long-running show about movies
Yep.
in Canada. Can you tell me just a little bit about that? Because what kind of show was it? What kind of movies? And like what did you learn from it?
Yeah, so it was called Saturday Night at the Movies. My father, his first name was a Welsh name, even though not a lot of Welsh blood in the family, but his name was Elwy. The show ran on TV Ontario, public television, ran for 25 years.
Wow.
And every Saturday night he would have 2 movies. There'd be like the A movie and then a B movie in a
Yeah.
way. And he would find some kind of thematic unity between the 2 movies. And the example I use, and I honestly don't know if they actually did this, but let's say he got the Oxbow incident with Henry Fonda, which is about a lynching. And so he would have a panel discussion between that movie and the next one about lynching and about vigilante justice, and talk about it with jurists and theorists and stuff like that. But he would
Wow.
also have gone to Hollywood and interviewed Henry Fonda. And he would use that part, and they would know what movies they were going to show throughout the season. So, Elwie, you got to ask these questions about Oxbow incident. You've got to ask these questions about this. He loved movies. He thought of going to Hollywood, just never did. I mean, when he met my mother, the farthest he traveled from Toronto in any distance was about 100 miles. And he meets her, and they fall in love, and they go to New York for their honeymoon. And he'd never been that far from home. And they ended up traveling over the entire world. But so the idea of him leaving Toronto and going to Hollywood was probably not going to ever happen. But he gave me the idea for Speed. He gave me the idea for, he and my mom and my brother were absolutely stoked and thrilled that I managed to get work in this business, and they were incredibly supportive. But he was more of a Hollywood film guy and British film.
Okay.
But he did love some foreign films. Wages of Fear, Children of the Paradise were things that he would come to again and again. But for his show, it was public television. They could only afford old films.
Right.
The newest film that they ever ran was the film that he ran on his last episode, and that was Speed.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Did you hook him up?
No, I tried to get him a little, They just spent a little money, or maybe they went to 20th and said, "Please, come on, it's for Graham,"
Yeah.
and they'd say,
It was-
"Who? Wasn't he
Uh,
rewritten by Joss Whedon?"
Was there? You say you got the idea from your dad, but like, what exactly does that mean? Like, he actually sat
Do you
you
want to
down
know?
and said,
Do you want to know? Because
"Yes."
okay. So once you hear this, now you don't know. In the next 30 seconds, you're going to know, and it's going to be like when you find out how a magic trick was done. When you go, "That's all it was." He said, "I hear there's a Kurosawa script about a train that can't slow down or it will blow up." And that became the movie Runaway Train, directed by Andrei Konchalovsky. Well, at first I said, "That's a great idea." And he said, "I know, it's a great idea. That's what I'm telling you." And I went to see it, and I came out thinking, well, there's no bomb. It's just they can't get to the brakes. The train's going through the Alaska countryside. There's no one at the helm. Can't get to the brakes, and it's all frozen. And I said, it'd be better if there's a bomb. A bomb is more kinetic, you can have a bad guy, all of this stuff. And I said, yeah, a train is so linear. You just get a helicopter and start pulling people off. So I'm already starting to solve the puzzle. And I thought, oh, it'd be better if it was a bus. And that's how it started. See, now you know.
It's still great. It's
Well,
still great.
I mean, it's just the reality of it that most ideas come from some version of something. It was interesting when Speed came out, and people, there was this short story about a mob boss's wife who's in her car, and she gets a phone call and it says, "If you try to slow down, you're going to blow up," and everything. It's like maybe they stole it from that. It's like, I never heard of that, but I did
Right.
hear of Kurosawa.
Sure.
And then when I did the TV show Boomtown, it was basically stealing from Rashomon, which I'd also never seen at that point. So
That's fantastic. It's interesting because you used the word platform earlier, which is now like what we have, not just channels. What do you think? And not to say not to ask you to give away any secret sauce, but there are not many people who have managed to do such great work over such extended period of time in so many different versions of this business. What is the thing that you think has pulled you through?
I have absolutely no idea, but I cannot begin to tell you how grateful I am that I'm still getting to work and that I'm doing stuff that I really enjoy working on, and that people, and you can tell it's one of my signature phrases, get a kick out of. Because there's something about saying people, oh, they like it or they admire it or whatever. It's like, I don't know, but get a kick out of it that's really what we're trying to do, right? It's create some kind of response. It's engaging people in a story so that when I'm watching cuts of Silo, if things are working, I find myself actually clapping my hands going, yes, that's a great moment. That worked. And listen, I feel that when I watch episodes of Slow Horses that Will has overseen. And I just go, oh my God, Will, you nailed that. And so it's, there's a certain level what my stuff is, and I hate to even think of it as my stuff. It's not. I just get to work with these great people, but it's, and I'm not trying to be false modesty there. But it is, I want to care about these characters. So I'm going to admit something to your audience that I usually don't tell people because it's really, it's a rough one, which is I only watched 5 episodes of The Sopranos. I only watched 5 episodes of Breaking Bad. I don't like watching shows about people I don't like. I'm not interested in that. I can understand why people do like that. I understand the artistry of, and I love, Vince Gilligan and I got to know each other over the Sony years, and I think he's brilliant. I think Breaking Bad is a fantastic show. It was the show that everyone in the Justified Writers Room would talk about, and it became such that and in Sneaky Pete it was Better Call Saul, and it became known as the show that shall not be named. And so people would say, well, last week on the show that shall not be named, because not only I'm also self-diagnosed as a small petty man. So if another show is like everyone's in love with it, it's like, oh, hell with them. So I am a small petty man, but so I care about these characters, and I want to feel that rooting factor for them. And I cared about Raylan. I cared about Boyd. And I cared about Ava. And I cared about Dewey Crow. And I really cared about Loretta. Oh, my God.
For sure.
I just had lunch with Caitlin Deaver last week, and it was just, we hadn't seen each other in 10 years. No, I visited her on the set of Unbelievable, but because Sarah Timmerman was producing and Dinner was directing. But I want to care about these people. And I want to be really terrified of the bad guys.
I mean, you mentioned Boyd. You've certainly talked about it before. And I think a lot of people listening will know that, and especially if they read Fire in the Hole, like he wasn't supposed to be around much longer. And no. I would say it's just someone who loves the show. I mean, I think that's part of what really kept the show going in terms of there were certain things he could do that maybe. I mean, he had a swastika on his arm. Like there were things that he could do that Raylan could never do. And I wouldn't compare him to anybody else, but there was just something about that push and pull between them that even if there's almost like a will they or won't they aspect to it, it was extended, it was super nuanced, super rich cat and mouse story, but but a deep, that intimacy between them, and to quote Will Smith quoting you, they dug coal together, quoting Elmore.
It was Mick Herron. Will Smith would never be. Will Smith is mean to me in different ways, like trying to trip me up on the name of the head of Apple, Tim Cook. And anyway, while he was in our presence. But anyway.
Oh, hilarious.
Will is incredibly funny. But yeah, there is. We dug coal together. So the thing about Boyd, it was very simple. Was we could just tell there was incredible chemistry between Tim and Walton. We didn't know who we were going to cast for Boyd, and it was FX. I don't know if specifically it was John or it was just the team at FX because they loved what he had done on The Shield, and they said, "What about Walton Goggins?" So we didn't even meet with him. I think maybe Tim and Walton got on the phone, or they knew each other. Anyway, we just said, "Yeah, okay, great, he's great. Let's get him." And then there's a scene in the church in the first episode, and it's like, oh my Lord, this is. He's going off about the mud people and all this shit, and Raylan just says, "I think you just like to blow up banks and steal money,
right?
Use any excuse you got, And it's like, oh man, this is great. And then it, tested really well, but the audience who wasn't happy that Boyd died, and so that had an impact. And Landgraf called, and I discussed it with Sarah and Michael and Carl and. We just said, you know what, it would be great. They're great together. Let's see. And, well, how is he going to survive? And so Raylan missed. And but Raylan never misses. I said, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So there's the story. He never misses. Why did he miss this time? You're going to pay to find that out. And then I remember where I was. I was in a car and called Walton. And, man, that was a good phone call. Yeah. So he became, Walton. So I'll tell a little story. So every year when FX, instead of being part of the upfronts of everyone else, they would have a big bowling party in New York, and they would fly us all in, all the people from the shows, the cast and the showrunners. And every year Walton and I would go see a play on Broadway. We saw, Tom Hanks in Lucky Man or Lucky Guy or whatever it was called. We saw Bryan Cranston in All the Way when he played LBJ. And we went to see Death of a Salesman with Philip Seymour Hoffman and Andrew Garfield, directed by Mike Nichols. All the way to the theater, people were yelling out, "Walton Goggins, loved you in The Shield! Walton Goggins, you were great in The Shield!" It was all about The Shield. And we come out of the theater, and this young guy says, "Walton Goggins, I love you in Justified." And I was like, cool, and gets a selfie and everything. And we go off to Joe Allen to have dinner. That was always the thing. We would have dinner and a show. Andrew Garfield's sitting in the corner. I said, "Should we say anything?" And Walton said, "Nah, not now, maybe later." And we're sitting there, and then I could just feel this presence over my shoulder, and I hear this deep booming voice, and it's Walton Goggins, and it's Philip Seymour Hoffman. And he says, "Oh, hey, Phil, we just saw you in the play. Man, you were great and everything." And it said, "Well, this is Graham Yost. He's the showrunner on Justified." "Oh, hi. That last season of The Shield was unbelievable." And I was like, oh, great. My one meeting with Philip Seymour Hoffman, God, I wish I had chances to see him and work with him. But that was that.
I think overall you're doing okay though. That one must sting, but still.
It doesn't sting. It's just
I know.
funny because Walton would just never let it drop. In fact, in the subsequent year, he paid someone, a drunk guy in a bar, to come up and just give me shit about The Shield. And
Yeah, that is a true friend.
Yeah.
That is a true friend.
I will say two things. One is Cranky Graham, which is Anthony Lane just wrote this great piece about Elmore and didn't mention Justified once, not at all. I'm gonna in the New Yorker, and I hope to meet him sometime because his review of Speed helped change my life, and he was a new critic at the New Yorker, and his review was, he called Speed the movie of the year, and it was June. So I owe a lot to him, but not having us in this Elmore Leonard article was a slap, and so he's going to pay. No, but the other thing is he got me reading Ross MacDonald, so I'll take that. One of the greatest things in my work life was opening up the Elmore's final book, which is Raylan, which came out of Tim saying to Elmore on the set when he visited, "Why don't you write another Raylan story?" And he came up with one story, loved it, and, enjoyed it, wrote another two, and threw it together as a novel. And it says for Graham and Tim. I like to think it says for Graham and Tim. It's better than if it says for Tim and Graham. But anyway, again, small petty man. But I got my name in an Elmore Leonard book, and that's about as good as it gets for someone who just loved his writing. And enjoyed spending any time I got to spend with him was fantastic.
It's funny now that you mention it. That article came out, I don't know, a month or so ago, maybe 2 months ago, in the New Yorker, and I don't recall them not mentioning. I think it's just implied. Justified is
Oh yeah,
implied.
yeah. Implied really works well in print. I'm just going to blame the editor who said, "Anthony, you don't have all the space in the magazine. We got to trim this down."
Yeah,
That's
they only
TV.
had
Who cares? We're the New Yorker. Who cares about TV? Let's just forget that.
they only had 11,000 words, so they had to make some cuts. But the nice thing that he does mention the biography, and I'm not trying to plug the biography, but I just like you just get the sense that Elmore was very diligent about his writing, but also diligent about being a good person. And
Yeah.
I think that it allows you to enjoy the work more when you don't have to spend any energy reminding yourself, oh, it's the art, not the artist.
Right. No, he
And
tried, and was sober a long time and struggles with that, and just a clear-eyed man about the world and his life and what he enjoyed doing, and was surrounded by good people, and his family is wonderful, and hearing that one of his great grandchildren sat at the end of the diving board so that Elmore wouldn't try and do a backflip when he was in his 80s. So don't know, Grandpa, no. And the fact that so many of the kids got Dutch tattooed on their ankles after he passed. It's just and that weekend of his funeral. There were. I'm sure Tarantino would have been there if he could have. Because I know how much he revered Elmore, and I know Elmore felt that Jackie Brown was the best film adaptation of any of his books, even though Tarantino, changed the name, changed the title, changed all sorts of shit. But it was just it was such an Elmore movie. But there was Scott Frank, so Tim was there, and Scott Frank and me and Mike Lupica, of course. My whole approach to Justified was I'm going to do Elmore Leonard the way Scott Frank did, which is you let Elmore be Elmore. You just make it as Elmore as you can. Don't try to outthink it. No, that's a mistake. It was one of the greatest privileges of my career to work on an Elmore Leonard show.
Well, we're thrilled that you did, and thank you for taking the time. Thank you for doing all of the great things that you've done, and especially Justified.
Thanks, Judd.
The Elmore Leonard podcast is produced and edited by Judd Rubin. Music by Greg Ahee. Hosted by Judd Rubin and Alex Leonard. Executive produced by Peter Leonard. Copyright 2025, Elmore Leonard Inc. Please visit us at elmoreleonardofficial.com or send us an email at hello@theelmoreleonardpodcast.com.